since we're live streaming. Why doesn't everybody move on in so we can hear, especially those academic leaders out in the edges.
It's for the stream.
Hello. Thanks everybody for coming. I appreciate it. And in anticipation for many competing interests on campus, we're live streaming this in case people couldn't join us today. So I'm going to give a brief introduction and then we'll get going. So thanks everybody for coming. Those of you that are here in person and those of you that are streaming with us online. I'm Warren Lloyd. I'm the Vice President for Advancement and Public Relations at EMU. And as many of you know by now, part of our guiding vision for our team is to raise the visibility of this great university. And I think we can all agree more people need to know about the great things we're doing here, and especially more people, not least of which our current students, need to know more about the extraordinary Greyhounds who have gone on to change the world after being educated at Eastern. So with this said, it brings me great pleasure to introduce Ed Chavez, a 1978 graduate of Eastern, who became one of the highest ranking public officials to have ever graduated from EMU, earning his BBA from EMU in 1978 and his JD from UNM in 1981, which we've already forgiven him for. Ed went on to enjoy a 23-year career in private practice, arguing his first case in front of the New Mexico Supreme Court at the young age of 28. He was later appointed to the Supreme Court by the late Governor Bill Richardson and served from March 2003 to March 2018. While serving the state's highest court, he became Chief Justice from 2007 to 2010. Now, of course, these accolades are extraordinary, and I could end at that. But what's interesting, and I think most telling about EMU, is that his motivations for success and his personal story are solidly Eastern. So I'm going to take 2 seconds just to point out a few things that I think really make him extraordinarily a Greyhound through and through. He learned his work ethic while working summers and weekends on his paternal grandfather's cattle ranch in Torrance County, New Mexico. He was born in Santa Fe, where he worked odd jobs in high school and graduated at the young age of 16. Like to get things done early, Ed, it looks like. Like many first-generation students and students in general, at Eastern, college wasn't in Ed's plans until his family encouraged him, somewhat against his will, to attend EMU, where his cousin was studying. However, being 16 without much of a direction, Ed had even considered quitting after his first semester, but his father convinced him to finish the year, and luckily he did. While studying in the Golden Library, right here in these walls, Ed had a chance encounter that changed his path. A student introduced himself to Ed, whose name was Rudy Chavez, who was a fellow green 1969 Chevy Nova owner, who they apparently passed each other often on the highway between Portales and Fort Summer. It was green. Interesting that it was green.
Greyhounds.
Yeah, go Greyhounds. But anyway, this person was a Vietnam vet, and he told Ed that his dream was to become a lawyer because, quote, a lot of people can't speak for themselves. And Ed told this story to myself. He went home that night, pondered the vet's aspirations to help others, recalled his own grandparents' story, the ones that owned the ranch that he grew up working on. And they were essentially kicked off their own land to make way for the government to build the interstate across New Mexico. And Ed thought to himself, what would it have been like if they had somebody to argue for them? And he made the choice that night, I think you said staring at a dorm room here in, which hall? Eddie Hall?
Eddie Hall.
Eddie Hall.
My hall.
No pun intended. To study law, and the rest is history, and we are grateful for it. With that said, please help me to welcome retired State Supreme Court Justice Ed Chavez.
Thank you, Vice President Lloyd, for the kind introduction. And Chancellor Johnston and also Associate Vice President Hauser, thank you for inviting Sandra and I back to Eastern New Mexico University. We are very grateful for the opportunity to revisit the blessings that we experienced here at Eastern New Mexico University. And it certainly made a material difference in my life because it set me on a path that I never or could have dreamed of ever living. So I really appreciate Eastern New Mexico University. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, every weekday in our country, people and businesses pursue justice in our courtrooms. Indeed, in America, a jury verdict in a trial that follows all constitutional requirements represents one of the most important contributions the judiciary makes to our democracy. And that's because justice is a community project. In jury rooms throughout the country, the community directly participates in this project we call justice. The American jury system empowers the citizens of our country to announce the standard of care that they will expect in their communities, the level of care that they will expect from their doctors, the level of care that they will expect from one another. They also will decide the safety that they expect the manufacturers to use in their design and development of their products in their communities. And these citizens also decide the guilt or innocence of somebody accused of a crime and are given the awesome power to decide that if a person is convicted of a capital crime, that person will be sentenced to death. And it is because of these powers and responsibilities that it is very important that a jury truly reflect the diversity of our communities, whether they are rich, poor, educated or uneducated, professionals or laborers. People over the age of 18 years of age can and they must participate in our civil and criminal justice system. Citizens have a community responsibility to further our free society by promoting safety and security in our country. But they also have the responsibility to find somebody guilty when the evidence at trial does not prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And all citizens should participate because, above all, justice requires an unapologetic and undaunted courage to exercise one's moral integrity. And New Mexico, like other states, has a population of non-English speaking citizens. But New Mexico is sincerely interested in all of its citizens participating in a jury trial. And for that reason, our very own Constitution provides that everybody has a right to participate as a juror, even if they do not have the ability to read, write, or speak the English or Spanish language. But the pursuit of justice doesn't only take place in our courtrooms. The pursuit of justice takes place on the streets, takes place when people lobby their legislators, lobby their executives. But for centuries, the pursuit of justice has roused the spirit of Americans, awakening their passion and courage to right a wrong. The concept has excited our patriotism because to stand in the path of an injustice is to put community above self. And the concept also symbolizes our liberty because in America, we do have the freedom to do something about injustices. Being born in America was a blessing, and I believe a blessing for everybody, because it's a republic where liberty is paramount, the liberty to speak, the liberty to worship, and define your own destiny. Liberty is so important in our nation that every coin in America has the word liberty on it. Yet, liberty without equal opportunity is no liberty at all. Real freedom includes equal opportunity. It comes with the responsibility to respect the freedom of others. It is this intersection between liberty and responsibility that defines justice. And to be sure, justice is subjective and it's ambiguous. The dialectic of our adversarial system, where it takes two parties, makes it so because you cannot see my hands unless you've seen both sides. But the history of our nation teaches that justice is deeply rooted in the truths that are self-evident. that all people are created equal with dignity and the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The revolution that gave birth to the United States infused our culture with these highest ideals and noblest values. We are the heirs of that first revolution. The Declaration of Independence, which documented the impetus of the revolution and christened our experiments in self-governance, expresses this devotion to equality, liberty, and the belief in the well-being of all ordinary citizens. The preamble to our great Constitution, ratified 13 years after the Declaration of Independence, repeats this devotion. It was we the people who sought to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, to promote the general welfare, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our descendants. Our Constitution reaffirms the idea that America must be a nation of benevolence and harmony, where its people enjoy personal freedom, economic opportunity, and self-determination. Stated simply, the Constitution was ordained to reinforce the truths that are self-evident, that all people are created equal, endowed with dignity, and the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But despite the clarity of these truths, during key moments in the history of our nation, people dared to question whether customs and practices were faithful to these truths. In each generation, our nation's highest ideals have been put to the test by people who demanded that the nation live up to the promises of America. Freedom, equality, opportunity, justice, promises that had long been deferred or denied to so many people at so many different times in the history of our nation. Deferred, that is, until somebody said, enough. This is not right. This is not America. Not to condemn America, but to recognize that perfecting our union is a continuing community project. Not because these people lacked patriotism. Pride in our country is not only appreciating what is great about our country, but sustaining and improving its greatness. With each generation, we get closer to the promises of America, but only because of the passion and courage of people in our communities to question whether what they see is consistent with the idea of America. At times, the contrast between the norm and the idea of America strongly intrigued Americans, moving them to fight for justice so that a wrong would not triumph. Frederick Douglass and others in the community dared to question the justification for slavery, antithetical to personal freedom. Susan B. Anthony and others in the community dared to question the justification for refusing to allow women to vote. Minorities dared to question why their children had to go to segregated schools. Their fight for justice laid the groundwork for Thurgood Marshall to challenge the separate but equal doctrine. We now have desegregated schools where students of all ethnic groups learn from their differences and stimulate one another to re-examine the most deeply held beliefs they have about themselves and of others. Hispanic attorneys in Texas dared to question why citizens of Mexican descent were systematically excluded from jury duty. As a result, 1 week before Brown versus Board of Education was issued, the United States Supreme Court issued their opinion in Hernandez versus State of Texas, holding that that practice was unconstitutional. Clarence Earl Gideon requested but was denied an attorney when he was accused of a state crime. He defended himself but was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison. In a handwritten petition to the United States Supreme Court on prison stationery, he dared to question why a poor person accused of a state crime did not have a right to an attorney. As a result, the United States Supreme Court reversed some of its prior cases, and now indigent defendants in state criminal trials have the right to counsel. As a postscript, after he was appointed counsel, although he had already served 2 years in prison, he was acquitted. And then there was our very own U.S. Senator Dennis Chavez, who introduced the first comprehensive civil rights bill in the United States Senate in 1944, aiming to prohibit discrimination in employment, education, public accommodations based on race, color, and creed. A filibuster killed that legislation, but his work was ultimately codified in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And of course, who can forget the drum major for justice, peace, and righteousness, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., or Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, who worked hard to improve safe working conditions and pay for migrant workers. I have recounted obvious examples of people who fought when the norm did not meet the ideals of America. You're going to have your own examples. But even today, as we read newspapers or listen to radio talk shows or podcasts or watch TV, there is an important debate going on in our country. It is a debate about who we are as Americans, our expectations, our beliefs, our values, and the government's role in furthering our beliefs and values. We are reevaluating our unique experiment in self-governance. In many respects, we are revisiting the idea of America, exploring whether we want to be an egalitarian nation or a wealth-based oligarchy. We may be assessing the meaning of the closing words to the Declaration of Independence. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. However you characterize the debate in our country, the debate is not new. Americans have always struggled with the role of government in a free society. An important debate because we the people are the government. Government is nothing more than citizens getting together to solve shared problems, to pool their resources and work together for the common good. This is why it is so important for each of us, no matter our role in society, to actively participate in our democracy. Whether you are a lawyer, a business person, a school teacher, or Joe the plumber, you have the potential to make a better world, not only for yourselves and your families, but for all who live in this world. Our democracy works best when everyone gets involved. The truth is, you get what you put into our democracy, and apathy deserves very little. So join any organization that affects you or your loved ones. School boards, community groups, policymaking bodies that improve the lives of others. If you're not at the table to set the agenda, other people will be there to set that agenda, and you'll never know if they are even aware of your interest, much less represent your interest. But while the debate of the general role of government takes place, one would think that the role of the justice system is not fairly debatable. The judicial branch's role is clearly defined in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights. History teaches that the Constitution may not have been ratified, but for a commitment to take care of and grant rights to private citizens. 10 amendments were added to the Constitution a mere 3 years following its ratification, a sacred body of law known as the Bill of Rights. Faithfully applying the procedural protections in the Bill of Rights is an essential role of the judiciary. Why? Because it is procedure that spells much of the difference between rule of law and rule by whim. Yet, as much as I revere the law and love the legal profession, I sense that the public is unsure about the law and the importance of law in a free society. Perhaps because law is morally ambiguous. Law is adversarial. Both sides make irreconcilable arguments, and yet only one side wins. And on occasion, maybe more often than not, media sound bites stimulate debate about the fairness of the result. And unlike the medical profession, whose fundraising abilities from the private sector are made possible as we search for cures for dreaded diseases, we don't see the private sector rushing to finance our legal system so that justice is affordable efficient, and equally available to everyone. Instead, we depend on the selflessness and tenacity of lawyers to champion the rule of law, to make possible equal access to justice, an indispensable component to the pursuit of justice. We depend on the willingness of lawyers, paralegals, and their staff to sacrifice the security of higher paying jobs to make sure that justice is the same in substance, procedure, and availability, regardless of a person's economic status. The extent to which we as Americans uphold the rule of law and ensure equal access to justice reflects our dedication to a just society. Our nation's unity is strengthened when we truly commit to liberty and justice for all. As James Madison once said, equal laws protecting equal rights are the best guarantee of loyalty and love of country. Every day, hundreds of people walk into our courts expecting justice from complete strangers because they have the faith that the rule of law will be present in their case. Courts deal with the aftermath of afflictions, addictions, failed or failing business or personal relationships, domestic violence, you name it. And as they do, all the while, they compel compliance with the constitutions and the laws. For judges, it's not about soundbite justice. It's not about political polling, and it's not about popularity contest. It's about fairness and impartiality. And the only way to fulfill this responsibility is for courts to maintain judicial independence. Now, what do I mean by judicial independence? It's a subject that is subject to interpretation and misinterpretation. Let me begin by telling you how judicial independence should not be interpreted. It should not be interpreted either by the public or any judge to mean that a judge is free to do as he or she pleases. Such behavior runs counter to the oath we take as judges to uphold the Constitution and the laws. Any attempt by a judge to put personal beliefs ahead of the Constitution undermines the effectiveness of the judiciary. It is appropriate, however, to interpret judicial independence to mean that as courts review legal disputes, issue decisions, that the courts must be fair and impartial. Judges must uphold the Constitution and the laws based on their own reading of the laws, unconstrained by political fear, fear for personal safety, other undue pressures such as money, and uninfluenced by the status of the parties. This concept of judicial independence, that judges should decide cases faithful to the law without fear or favor, remains one of the fundamental cornerstones of our democracy. This independence is not for the benefit of the judges. It is for we the people. We the people are the intended beneficiaries of the fair and just administration of justice. Yet, to be clear, I'm not saying that judicial independence requires that courts be immune from criticism. On the contrary, I firmly believe that the destruction of our democracy begins with the suppression of free speech. Our democracy is strengthened when citizens comment favorably or unfavorably about how they perceive government is protecting their individual rights and interests. Constructive criticism is patriotic. Indeed, if the public were precluded from criticizing government actions or expressing their concerns about disparate treatment, one must wonder if we would have ever adopted the 19th Amendment, which gives women the right to vote, or whether or not we would have had civil rights in our great country. If courts succumb to the pressures of politicians, racially segregated schools would still be the norm. And while I believe that judges should expect public criticism for some of their decisions, there's a difference between criticism and intimidation, a difference between criticism and hostility. The recent tone of hostility toward the third branch of government has reached a level of hostility not often seen in the history of our great country. But this does not mean that the judiciary has not been the subject of political attacks in the past. It has. Early on in our republic, Thomas Jefferson himself convinced Congress to institute impeachment proceedings against Justice Samuel Chase, Why? Because Justice Samuel Chase, a Federalist, was openly critical of Jefferson's party. Now, the Senate refused to convict Justice Chase, but he still had to endure a 10-day impeachment trial. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's unsuccessful attempt to add members to the United States Supreme Court because it had found unconstitutional some of his New Deal legislation was likewise generally viewed as an attack on judicial independence. And although concern about judicial independence has been around for a couple of centuries, the tension that presently exists has sounded an alarm warning of its potential destruction. Calls for the impeachment of judges and even threats of violence against judges and their families has become increasingly common. Yes, judges should expect criticism, but they should not expect personal threats on themselves or their loved ones. The risk created by such personal attacks and efforts to intimidate judges and how they rule may very well influence a judge, which means that we, the people, are no longer the beneficiaries of fair and impartial rulings, which means that we, the people, may no longer be assured that the courts will uphold the Constitution, and that we, the people, are no longer guaranteed access to the courts to preserve our rights and liberties. Although it may be appropriate for politicians to consider public opinions and the views of special interest groups when drafting laws and regulations, it is never appropriate for judges to do so when deciding cases. In this respect, judges are very different from the other two branches of government. Judges are accountable to the Constitution and the laws, not political pressure. Thus, our liberty is totally dependent on judicial independence. We must insist that our judges not decide the merits of cases based on their own personal beliefs or based on the beliefs of politicians or special interest groups. To ensure justice for all and protect our constitutional rights, we must defend fair and impartial courts from political interference. We must demand that our judges be accountable to the rule of law, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. By doing so, we will further our free society and honor the great promises of our Constitution. Remember, the true power of America does not come from its gross national product or its military might, but from our values and endless efforts to live up to the ideals that forged this great nation. The purpose of our days is to create a legacy that lasts beyond our days. And the purpose of law and politics must be to respect every American and afford them a fair opportunity to build the best life possible for themselves and their families, while enjoying the riches of freedom and the security of justice. Serve others with dignity, listen to the applause from your conscience, and never doubt that what you do is a worthy contribution to this community project we call justice. And the other words on every coin in America also appears on every bill in America. In God we trust. God bless all of you, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions? Should be willing to take questions if anyone has any.
Bold.
I think it's possible to be impartial now.
Yes, I do. I have a lot of faith in our judges.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can't forget, our country is based on checks and balances. And even within the judicial system, we have checks and balances. A trial judge who makes a decision and enters a ruling can be appealed to the next level. In New Mexico, you can appeal to the Court of Appeals or directly to the Supreme Court if it involves a life in prison penalty. On the other hand, you can go to the Court of Appeals, then to the New Mexico Supreme Court, and if there's a federal question, you can go all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And we, on the New Mexico Supreme Court, have seen cases reach the United States Supreme Court. So it's a checks and balances that is available to us. Now, finally, I'll tell you that the last court to get it right or wrong is the United States Supreme Court. But whatever they decide, we as citizens should honor their ultimate ruling. Had we not honored Brown versus Board of Education, we would still have segregated schools.
I'll ask one more question. Oh, okay.
So Noel Bartle, we met several years
Yes.
ago in the magazine, we wrote about you, and back then you were still involved, helping with research or something with the state Supreme Court. And I was just curious if you're still involved in some roles as an advisor of some kind.
I have one pending case at the New Mexico Supreme Court, so I still do volunteer work there. I try to do volunteer work with local government, state government, criminal justice reform. My passion these days is really working on homelessness prevention. That occupies all of my time right now. To me, it's an important, I know we have a lot of homeless people. We need affordable housing for them. But if you're building housing for the existing homeless people and you have people who, due to unintended or unexpected events in their life, cannot pay their rent and so are evicted, not only do you have family instability, but you have adverse childhood experiences which can cause generational poverty or other problems. So to me, this is my passion, and odds of me volunteering to take another appellate case are slim to none.
So this is a question for everybody. Is it in the best interest of capitulate out of intimidation and risk losing federal programming that basically supports the mission of the university as it used to be? Or should a university just go ahead and lay down and or should the university resist, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and lose its financial aid and federal funding, which in the case of a small university such as ours would mean closure? At what point does intimidation versus upholding the standards of a university, at what point do they conflict, and at what point should a university back down?
If I had an answer to that question, I'd be the President of the United States.
I mean, this conversation has been about the power of the judiciary, so I would say, from my opinion, it's not at the university level that federal law should be fought, lost, or won. I would probably end my comment there. I mean, it is an interesting tension, but as you see happening across the country, I don't know that either side has come to any enlightened solution to that problem.
It's not really a legal question, it's a political.
Right, that's right.
But it's one that could end up before the courts. That's why I bring this up too.
I'll quote our great provost, who at one point said, "You don't want to answer a legal question with an academic answer." I have one more question. Oh, you gonna?
I just, if you don't mind, just one minute. It's interesting. I think, as we talk about it as a community project, when things were brought before the judiciary at different points, it was the people that had to pose the questions, to pose the challenges, and I think it was really good to hear your comments and how that is tracked generation over generation. It's not the first time, but I think it seemed like the common theme was that we, the people, had to call the question, to bring it to a legal system where the answers and interpretations in relation to our Constitution. Have you, in your experiences, do you feel like you've had those kinds of questions and challenges and changes in decisions?
Most definitely. There are a lot of issues that come to the court that are based on the experiences of people, including laws that have existed on the books for decades that allowed payday loans to charge over 1,000% interest. And finally, there was enough of an uproar of people to challenge the conscionability of that practice. We have people who were concerned about the fact that farm workers were excluded from the Workers' Compensation Act, and without people getting together and mounting a challenge to those sorts of issues, you have same-gender marriages that have been advocated for throughout the United States for really decades. And so ultimately, I think it's when people are active in their democracy, and that doesn't just mean lobbying your legislature or lobbying the executive branches. It means having the courage to get a lawyer and pursue a case in the courts. It's all three branches of government. And all three branches of government also have their checks and balances. And we've had cases where we interpreted a statute the way we believe the legislature intended it to read. And when they disagreed, they had the opportunity to revise the legislation. It's a checks and balances. If the governor is not executing the laws of the state, the governor can be challenged. And it's usually people behind the scenes that influence whether or not there are challenges.
Thank you for that. I guess necessary of the past matters, precedent matters. And I think this is a good point to remind us about perhaps what we've been losing in terms of having this type of dialogues and thinking about my own students in my history class, how to go about telling them to continue with this experiment that the founding fathers have given us through generations to revere the sanctity of the law, those cherished concepts, free speech, so forth and so on, in these difficult times, and how to be an American who stands up for the law and who can practice free speech and all of these rights in this country. So I think what you gave us, it's a good reminder. It kind of reinforces what I want to tell my students in my class. But what else would you say? What would you suggest? What should we be telling our students in our history classes when we take a look at, U.S. History 1, U.S. History 2, civil rights, those maligned terms nowadays? How do we go about that?
The way you go about it is repeating itself. I feel as though we're going back into the 1930s. That doesn't mean that it has to be that way. And it doesn't have to be that way because we have elections. And if people are not engaged in their democracy, things are going to remain the same. But I firmly believe that the people will either like or dislike what is going on at any given time. And if they dislike it, they will mobilize against the present situations. On the other hand, if they like it, it's status quo. In fact, a lot of times when you are pleased with what's happening, you become dormant. You don't actively participate in your democracy because you think it's going well. So I think the students just have to remember that we have examples throughout the history of this great nation that reflect how society can influence the idea of America.
Could you give us an example of a case that you're most proud of, that you presided over, or the most impactful moment in your role as state Supreme Court justice?
There are many cases for sure. Let me tell you about a case that I wrote that I didn't really like the result, but it was the correct result. And it's the medical assistance in dying. Is there a constitutional right for somebody to have a doctor assist them to end their life? And I concluded, and my colleagues all agreed with me, that the answer to that question is no. but I took the time to write a long opinion that expressed how some other states were dealing with the issue because of the safeguards that are essential to make sure that it in fact was the individual's choice to end their life, not somebody else's. And so we now have the Elizabeth Whitefield End of Life Options Act because the legislature took to heart the idea that it was their responsibility to deliberate, to listen from all sides and decide what to do. They made their decision. Now you can, in fact, medical assistance in dying, but there are very rigorous standards that have to be met, rightfully so. We could not have done that in the body of an opinion. It would not be appropriate for us to do that. So that's an example of a case that was hard to write because I thought to myself, if I was ever in that situation, I probably would want to avail myself of that opportunity for whatever reason.
So sometimes you've got to write an opinion that you don't necessarily agree with all the potential outcomes to inspire legislators to make
Yeah.
the right change.
Right.
Interesting.
And there are other opinions. I think the payday loan opinion I wrote was a good opinion. The workers' compensation case regarding farm workers was a good opinion. I think my double jeopardy discussions and opinions had changed the way we look at double jeopardy in New Mexico, which I thought was important. But I don't know, it was over 200 opinions that I myself authored, and so it's hard to pick which one.
What's your favorite color?
What's my favorite what?
Color.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Anyone have anything else?
You said yesterday in class,
Yes.
programs for our prisoners when they come out of prison. Do you think we could learn from other states with the programs that they offer?
Absolutely. I'm going to say something. Of our government in New Mexico, but I firmly believe it's true. We resist the ideas from other states for whatever reason. But Texas has maybe had. It's been a while since I studied it. I studied juvenile justice because of the concerns for how juveniles are treated. They are guilty of a crime, but the real question is whether or not the child is amenable to treatment, and there are facilities available to provide that treatment. If the answer to either one is no, they go in to the model citizens in the state penitentiary system. And the recidivism rate coming out of prison is about 50%. But in Texas, they have a program where they take the most violent juveniles and they bring them together and they role play with them. One plays the victim, the other one plays the perpetrator. And the whole goal that apparently has been successful is it teaches them empathy. And that's what a lot of judges have decided about some of our juveniles, is that they are incorrigible, that they have no empathy, and so there's no point in giving them a second chance. When we know that the brains of people, in particular males, does not really mature until about age 27. So I think we have to rethink how we deal with justice. In other states, in fact, say, okay, juvenile, you must go to the prison system. But after 10 years or after 15 years, we're going to allow you an opportunity to go before a parole board to prove that you have remorse, to prove that you understand what you did was wrong and that you have bettered yourself within the system. What we need for that to be successful is for the prisons to provide good rehabilitation services for the youth. In fact, they need to do it for adult prisoners too. We've got to get away from a 50% recidivism rate, which is reoffending.
As a United Methodist minister
Yes.
in Oklahoma, we have
enter the prisons, the population. And I've been with the United Methodist Church 25 years, and this program is called CJAM Redemption, and it works.
Criminal Justice and Mercy Ministries.
I want to listen with you.
Yeah.
I would encourage people to really contact legislators and the governor and start pushing for programs and truly make a difference. I mean, we have funding now for a lot of programs. But we need ideas.
It took us some years to get to the point where people accepted it. And I mean, I still go around and give lectures and so forth, and we'll have somebody say, well, I don't know why you bother with them anyway. They got themselves there, let them get themselves out. But one of the points that we've been able to prove is that if we have inmates who stay with our programming, not just while they're incarcerated, but even after, because we provide clean and sober living conditions, we provide extra educational programmings outside the prisons. I'm basically on call 24/7. I mean, it's like, I had one of my guys that was working at City of Cache, Oklahoma, and had a stroke at the age of 39. And his mother lived in Indiana. Well, she couldn't get there, so I sat in the hospital for 3 days. But that's part of what we do. And so because of that, he's now fully recovered and is back at work full time. But we've been able to show, because of our volunteers and all the people that work with CJAM, the recidivism rate in Oklahoma with our groups, has dropped from 70% to 5%.
And I think there's kind of an open lunch in the cafeteria.
Yeah, it's an invite. Yeah, at 11:30. So
Invite only, sorry.
I'll have that.
Raise your hand if you'd like an invite. Just reach out to John Howard. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This has been such a great honor. For you. So forecast, whatever you decide to say now.